Sit back and listen to this extremely interesting story.
My husband doesn't know about my little hobby. I write stories and publish them on candid sites. Lots of stories from my experiences in college and before and during my first marriage. I was pretty wild in college, but although a lot of guys got into me usually on the second or third date, though quite a few did on the first date. But college was a time for experimentation and for madness. When I said I do and married Greg, my first husband, I thought I'd put it all behind me. I'd found the love of my life and he'd be my last and best lover. An added bonus for me, a girl who had grown up in trailer parks was his rich family. But I had known a lot of rich kids I could have hooked, but with Greg it was mostly love. Unfortunately, he didn't feel the same. I was just a trophy for him, something to check off the list of what people expected of him, someone to help him check off other expectations, like kids, house and cooking, cleaning, and general errand runner. Romance flew out the window as soon as we left the reception and began our honeymoon, and I should have seen it coming. His parents insisted on a prenuptial agreement. My lawyer, when he reviewed it, expressed surprise that it didn't include any mention of adultery or other causes of divorce. It simply stated that if I initiated divorce proceedings, I would forfeit all claims on marital property, except in the amount of $50,000. However, should Greg file for divorce, the same penalties would apply to him. I was in love, Greg was in love, and the prenup was ridiculous. I imagined that his parents were trying to protect the $2,000,000 home they were gifting the newlyweds. I signed with a light heart. I'd just thought his parents didn't like me, the trailer trash gold digger. We took a Caribbean cruise on our honeymoon, and before we even got to the first port in the Bahamas, Greg was only looking at the girls by the pool, and he was grabbing the waitresses in the dining room. I protested, thinking I hadn't actually seen it. But it became undeniable when a flight attendant stopped by our table to inform my husband that he would be removed from the ship at the next port if he didn't stop harassing the wait staff. Greg laughed, saying he hit the waitress by accident, but it wouldn't happen again. The steward looked at Greg in disbelief for a few minutes, but then said, "Make sure it doesn't happen again." He left it at that, turning and walking away. We had a wonderful time in the Bahamas, everything I'd hoped for on my honeymoon. Jamaica was where the trouble really began. When we arrived, while I was getting ready, my groom slipped away and left the ship alone. I didn't know where he'd gone and was afraid that I'd miss him if I left the ship, so I ended up missing Jamaica altogether, except for what I could see from the ship's deck. My husband barely made it back to the ship, drunk as a sailor. He passed out on the bed while I cried myself to sleep. He was apologetic the next day and was as attentive as he could be on Grand Cayman. He wandered off when we were in Cozumel, leaving me alone in Center Frogs. It was only by chance that when he excused himself to go to the bathroom, I was staring out the window and saw him leave with a pretty senorita, whom I'd noticed him eyeing in the barroom. I jumped up to run after him, but was stopped by the waitress who presented our tab. By the time I had paid the bill, Greg was gone. I returned to the ship, wondering what the hell was wrong with me. I'd only been married for 5 days, and my husband had already abandoned me twice. When he returned to our stateroom, it was 4 o'clock, and he seemed genuinely distressed to find me red-eyed and tearful, surrounded by soiled Kleenex I'd used on my dripping nose. "I just left to buy you a bracelet. When I came back, you were gone," he complained. "I didn't buy it. I saw you with that girl. I saw you come out of the Toad with her. I was so upset that I hoarse. It's a mistake when you cry. My nostrils were blocked. I'm not the most attractive when balls are flying out of my nose." As I hurried to clean up the damage, Greg knelt in front of me looking down. First, to ensure he wasn't going to kneel in any of the damage. "No, honey. I had admired her bracelet, and she was just showing me where she'd bought it." He held out a blue pubilla bracelet to me. "I was devastated when I came back, and you were gone. I looked all over for you. I finally gave up and returned to the ship. Here, put on the bracelet and let's go get some dinner." The bracelet was beautiful. I put it on, wiped my nose again, and kissed my errant husband. I did notice that he apparently hadn't stopped drinking while searching for me. It was 2 weeks after we returned that the denial I was indulging in was totally destroyed. Greg had returned to work, and I was arranging the bills for payment. Greg had paid the final bill from the cruise ship with a credit card, but somehow the statement ended up in the due bill pile. I was surprised at the amount of the bill, considering most things had been included in cruise price. A quick review of the bill showed the reason: the purchase of several blue pubilla bracelets from the ship's gift shop. How could he, I thought, then realized how gullible I was. So the pretty senorita was just showing him the store where she bought her bracelet, our gift shop. Probably one of the bracelets went there. I checked the purchase date on the invoice. Someone in Jamaica got one too. I was steaming mad when I got up to go to the toilet. I soon wished I hadn't. God damn, that burned and stung. I didn't know what had happened. I wondered if this was something I'd caught at Mexico. I went right in to see old Doctor Wright. He'd been our family's MD for years. He drew blood and took a urine sample. I asked if I really had to because, well, it burned. I had to, and it did burn. He sent me home with the promise that he'd call me as soon as the results came in. He told me he was pretty sure what it was and gave me a prescription for antibiotics that I could fill immediately. When he called, he confirmed that his guess was correct. "Betty Sue, what have you been up to?" he asked. "Well, I told you I'd just come back from Mexico and the Caribbean. It was my honeymoon. I hadn't mentioned that during the office visit." He was silent for a moment. "Congratulations, Betty." "Happy wedding." He paused again. "But I have to tell you that you are sick." I was shocked and immediately began to argue that this was impossible, that I had only been in contact with Greg for the past year and had just gotten married. "Well, maybe it's not your fault, but your husband is." I hung up and picked it up again to hear Doc say, "You're really lucky." Many women do not feel such a burning symptom, and the disease can seriously damage their organs. The antibiotics you're taking should take care of the infection, but I'd like you to come in for a follow-up in 2 weeks just to be sure. I thanked her and hung up, still in shock. Even during my wildest pranks in college, I would never get sick. Of course, I was careful enough. I think I single-handedly raised the value of several defense companies. Unfortunately, although I used them with Greg when we were engaged, I enjoyed the freedom. And I married a bad guy. I steamed about it all day and exploded when he walked in the door. Of all the reactions I had imagined, it was never the one I got when I hurled my accusations at him. As I wound down, he laughed. He laughed. I was in shock, unresisting as he hugged me, and then went to grab a beer from the fridge, explaining as he went, "Hey, babe, we were on vacation. We were supposed to go out and have fun." I huffed and puffed and threatened to blow up the house. I would sue him and divorce him. He just laughed and said, "Great, this will make my parents very angry. They were afraid I would leave with the home they gave you." This brought me to a brief. His parents were trying to protect me. I left. I got in the car and drove away, aimlessly I thought, but soon found myself driving up the driveway to Greg's family home, or I should say estate. I stopped by the tennis courts, where I saw my in-laws engaged in a furious game. They stopped as I walked onto the court. One look at my face and they knew. I think I was shivering from shock. I couldn't speak coherently. Greg's dad wrapped his jacket around my shoulders, and he and his wife hugged me between them as they walked me into the pool house, the closest nearby building. They sat me in at the dinette table and fired up the Keurig and wrapped my hands around the hot cup of a strong roast. Then they sat opposite me and waited with concerned looks on their faces. As my shivering subsided and I began sipping the coffee, Marian reached across the table and grasped my hand. "What happened, sweetie?" I looked at them and yanked back my hand. A rage that had been simmering in me threatened to erupt as I accused them. "You knew, didn't you? You let me marry the bastard." Marian recaptured my hand and soothingly said, "We really tried to warn you, sweetheart. Barry even offered you money, but you were in love." The care evident in her speech brought me up short. "I just thought you didn't like me." Barry laughed. "God, no. We thought you were too good for Greg. Way too good. But we thought if anyone could fix him, it'd be you." Marian added, "At least that's what we'd hoped. Why did you make me sign that marriage contract? Greg spent time with other women during our honeymoon, gave me a disease, and got $2,000,000,000 house as a reward." I almost spat. My in-laws exchanged a glance, after which Barry nodded to his wife, who began speaking. "We thought about doing it the other way." She patted my hand. "Look, honey, we gave you the house because we thought you deserved something for the pain we expected Greg would bring you. But we hoped it would work out and didn't want to inadvertently present an incentive to bail on the wedding. We want it to work. We want Greg to become the man he should be." His wife shook her head ruefully. "Yeah, maybe wanting him to become someone we could be proud of was reaching too far." She sat back, releasing my hand. "We didn't mean to make a trap for you, which is what I realize now it could be, or worse. It accomplished the exact opposite of what we wanted." Barry spoke up. "Be honest. We knew it was a trap. We thought we could avoid the embarrassment of Greg getting divorced if it meant you losing the house. We knew it was a honey trap." I stared at them. They said they liked me, but their plan was to avoid embarrassment for them. I was trapped in this marriage unless I wanted Greg to have $2,000,000 that should be mine. I got up and left. At first, I had to deal with this disease. The doctor said that the treatment would take a week. I would wait 2 weeks, then I would start my revenge. Do you have friends? I'm in the mood for something unusual. I licked my lips seductively, and I mean unusual. I touched his tongue, wrapping my arm around him. It had been 2 weeks since I had left Egypt, the land of denial, and I was well. I found this young guy in the meat market of a local dance club. I chose this place for 2 reasons. First, I knew every guy here was open to talking, and second, it was a place I learned Greg frequented. In fact, my husband was quite famous among the residents of this dump. The guy looked around and said, "Yes, I have some friends who might be interested." "How much do you want?" What did the walrus say to the oysters? "We can't do with more than 4 to lend a hand to each." 4 more would be good. I smiled. "Let them meet us here." I gave him some of my business cards with my address on them. I patted him again and left with a smile. "Don't keep me waiting, boy." "Oh, and tell them I have a fully stocked bar." It was a long night. Greg was gone, and I had forgotten how quickly young people recover. I dated every guy at least twice, and some again after that. After the second night, I realized they had contacted a couple more guys who hadn't scored before the bars closed and invited them to my party. At least I think it was only a couple, but I really didn't pay that much attention to what these guys looked like, so I can't swear if any of the 7 that were there that morning were there when we started. It was fun. I had forgotten how much fun group socializing can be, and the revenge aspect added a certain spark of J and size quoi to the whole thing. I loved it. I especially loved the looks on their faces when I did a little dance as I led them into the bedroom, leaving their clothes on. The facial expressions came as I pointed to the large photo of Greg I had placed on the nightstand, and explained that my husband couldn't please me, so I really needed to have a good time. I heard the couple whisper, "Greg." I knew my husband's reputation had just changed. When Greg stumbled in at 9:30 a.m. to see that I was still hanging out with the boys, it was ice cold. It turned out that only Greg was supposed to have fun in our marriage. He blew up when he walked into our bedroom and saw me reenacting the Eiffel Tower with the 2 remaining boys. He was offended when I suggested that he could come closer and see how real men spend their time. When he went to attack me, 3 of my other friends restrained him and on my advice held him while I enjoyed myself with the other 2. Knowing Greg was watching added something powerful to my excitement. I was satisfied like never before and shouted my glory. Greg threatened me, so one guy punched Greg in the stomach, promising to teach him if he touched me with one hand to reinforce the message. 2 more punched him in the head and then threw him out into the hallway. I happily spent the rest of that Saturday fulfilling their every wish. I have 1 more evening to go to the club. After that, friends started coming directly to our house. I also invited some girls over free booze, and socializing is a great incentive. It took 2 weeks of hard partying to completely destroy Greg's reputation and subject him to constant humiliation at every club he showed his face before he broke down. I had only been married for 2 full months before Greg gave me the papers. I figured it was $1 million a month, not including the booze and food my parties cost all on Greg's account. His parents had shown up several times during those 2 weeks, begging me not to embarrass them with my blatant adultery. At least Greg was discreet, they claimed. Last time they came, I decided I had had enough. I smiled and put my arms around both of them and invited them to join us. I already told the neighbors that the 3 of us were friends. They fled. This was my last group communication. That day, Greg moved out at his parents' insistence and filed for divorce. I understand it only cost them $2,000,000 to get him to agree to do it.
Subscribe to our channel so that your second C, Gaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.